certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
For the first time, court was shown the pristine sample of Ciara Glennon's hair collected from the crime scene. Welcome to day 77 of Claremont in Conversation with Natalie Bonjolo, Tim Clark and Damien Cripps. Well, we've heard so much about RH17. Tim, can you describe this hair sample for us that you saw today?
Yeah, Nat. So this was as you said in the intro, this is a hair sample that was taken from Ciara, or Ciara's body at least, before it had even been removed from the sandy spot in Eglington where she was found. And this is why more than 20 years later, it became so important, because it was basically taken from there before anyone had really had a chance to inspect the remains in any great detail on that day in 1997. And when it was taken, it was placed in a yellow top container. We heard a lot about yellow top containers back in the DNA portion of the trial. Was given to Laurie Webb from Path West, and then he took it and stored it in Path West. And incredibly, that hair sample was not touched for 21 years until it was handed by the police to Rhys Powell at the Chem Centre in 2018, which is when him and his colleague Peter Collins went to work on it, as they had worked on so many of these hair samples from Ciara. And two fibres, blue polyester fibres, very similar to the ones that we've discussed, found in other parts of Ciara's hair in the car and on Jane's hair, were discovered by Mr. Powell and Mr. Collins during those 4 days that they went over that hair sample. And today we saw a picture of it for the first time. Long-time listeners might remember we discussed this at some length way back in the post-mortem portion of the trial, because there was some discussion as to the continuity of the hair sample because of how it was taken, and more importantly, why it wasn't on the video that was taken. You might remember, or listeners might remember, there was a extensive video recording taken of the scene and then the post-mortem, but for some reason, this little portion when this hair sample was taken was cut out of the video. The person that was taking the video, their best explanation was that they were having to change the battery on the old style video camera at that time, and that's why it wasn't there. And that led to some questioning about the continuity, who touched it, whether they touched it with their bare hands, and questions of that nature, which we might return to sometime very soon when Mr. Jovich does his cross-examination of Mr. Powell, although Mr. Powell's first involvement with it was obviously all those years later, so whether he will be able to answer any of those ongoing questions is unlikely. But there was a photo taken of it when it did arrive at the Chem Centre, and we saw that today. And it was I've got to say, it was quite a significant portion of hair. It wasn't 30 or 50 strands. It was quite a significant lock of hair that had been placed in this pot for all those years. And obviously, when it was taken out, it became even more significant because of the fibres that the prosecution say were present.
Yeah, so there were 55 fibres recovered, but 2 are critical to this trial. So just tell us about those. What were they matched to?
Yeah, so these are the blue polyester fibres that we've heard so much about, said to be from Mr. Edwards' Telstra work pants stroke shorts, and all the comparisons with those fibres were done with all the other corresponding fibres. So similar fibres found in Ciara's hair, a similar fibre found in Jane's hair, the exemplar pair of pants that eventually did come to be in the possession of the prosecution, and the fibres found in Mr. Edwards's actual car. And so all the round robin of comparisons were done when they were eventually discovered in 2018.
Yeah. Damien, each day Tim describes to us the pictures that he sees that are shown in the court of the exhibits. How important are these visual exhibits to the judge and to the people who are sitting in the courtroom in a trial like this?
Nat, I think that the listeners at home or wherever they are listening would be able to answer that question in their own mind the same as I'm going to answer it. It's difficult when we're hearing Tim describe it because he does such a great job of describing what those things are. But if you could add to that a picture of what it actually was, it would be terribly helpful because you would, it's that human nature of trying to get to the bottom of something. It becomes clearer what something is when you're given a visual aid.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess as trials move on and as technology moves on, that is available more and more often and in more and more ways.
I think that sometimes one of the things that I've found as a trial lawyer, we get so caught up in what's going on in the nature of our investigation into trying to get to the bottom of it, that sometimes we lose sight of what could simply be really helpful to a person trying to make a decision is a picture. I mean, I've started trials before, and I'm not embarrassed or ashamed to say, where I've had a trial judge say to me and the prosecutor, did it not occur to either of you to simply provide us with a map? Because obviously now we've got the Google Maps, which, for years and years and years, trial lawyers never had. I mean, sure, you could come into court with a street directory, a UBD, I think that used to be called. But now it's so simple to simply go to Google Maps or something equivalent and print off a map, which when you're trying to describe, say, for instance, a traffic incident, and you say, you were heading down such and such a street and you turn left onto such and such a street, if you just simply present a map, it makes it so much easier for a person to determine what those words actually mean. And as technology advances, if we're talking about critical fibres and fibres, some of the pictures that would be becoming available to the people in the process in this trial would be in such a beneficial position because of technology, because those pictures and the technology that cameras and lenses have now can really blow them up so we can see all the things that the experts are describing. I think it's a great time and it's only going to get better. Yeah,
I mean, the old saying, a picture paints 1,000 words, and that is definitely the case in this trial, I imagine, Tim.
I think we've had 1,000 pictures and about 100,000 words in the last 4 days now.
That's right.
Just to add what Damien said there, I think without the photographs of the fibres that we have been shown ad infinitum over the last week or so, this fibre portion of the trial would simply be impossible to run, because the way that, and as Damien's so adequately explained there, explanations are all very well, and to describe a delusterant and how something looks under a microscope is all very well. But if the judge could not see it himself, then I think that he would come to the conclusion, well, I just can't decide without seeing it with my own eyes. And I have to say, a lot of Justice Hall's own questions of Mr. Powell over the last week or so have been based around what he has seen on the screen. And he has asked, well, that looks slightly thicker, or that that coloration why is that the way it is? So, absolutely invaluable. And as I say, the fibre portion has been absolutely incalculable. The amount of photographs we've actually been shown.
And interestingly today, that at one point Justice Hall actually asked for the lights to be turned down because he wanted to see a picture clearer.
Yeah. So just to describe it to the listeners, you've got these bright field images, which is the white background and the dark fibre. You've got these polarized images, which are like the negative. It looks a little, if you can imagine a jellyfish in an aquarium under the UV lights, that's what it looks like a little bit. But then there are other additional photographs that go with it, and one of them is particularly the phosphorance of the fibre, so how it appears in the dark, basically. But with the lights up, the dark appears dark on the screen. And so Mr. Powell was trying to explain that the one fibre was slightly more phosphorant than the other, i.e. glowed a bit more. And so Justice Hall said, well, yeah, let's dim the lights, and didn't ask for the popcorn, but he but he did dim the lights, and lo and behold, the image on the screen did become a little bit clearer. So
Interesting.
Just another example, no stone unturned, as we've said so many times.
Yeah, that's right. Now, also under the microscope today was the fibres that were found in Bradley Edwards' old work car.
Yes, that's right. So these are the last batch of fibres that we'll be going through. And they were actually not the last batch of fibres to be found, but they were some of the fibres that really did kick off this second stage of the fibre investigation when the car was seized in 2016. It was Mr. Powell himself, along with his colleague Peter Collins, who really did the dirty work, and it was dirty work because it was debris, scrapings, and all the dust mites and dust bunnies that you could imagine might be in a bracket on a car that had been sort of used for more than 20 years, almost continuously, but not by Mr. Edwards, of course. And they got down on their hands and knees with their masks and their gowns and their scalpels and their razor blades and extracted these scrapings from this bracket, popped them in a petri dish, took them back to the lab, and then under the microscope, there they were, these 13 so-called critical fibres, which are said to have endured for more than 2 decades in this car. And so we started to go through those today, and all the matches, or comparisons at least, that were made with all the other blue fibres that we've described.
And while a lot of those fibres corresponded, there was more in this category of fibres that varied, wasn't there?
Correct. Yeah. And again, I think I'm anticipating, I'm guessing Mr. Jovich might really hone in on this. So the fibres, when the fibres taken from the car were compared to the other critical fibres, i.e. the ones on Ciara and Jane and the Karrakatta victims' shorts, there was a bigger variance, or a more common variance, and the variance in most terms was the diameter, i.e. the width, how wide the fibre appeared. But what Mr. Powell said was, when they then got these Telstra pans in 2018, so 2 years after the car was seized, and the swatch of the material that was used to make these pants, when they compared those fibres to the ones in the car, they almost all matched as close as you could. They corresponded. So the Chem Centre report concluded that because those fibres in the car matched the swatch, and the swatch and the pants matched the other fibres, then they could complete the circle and say, QED, those fibres from Ciara and Jane and Karrakatta matched the fibres in the car, even though they actually didn't, if you see what I mean.
Wow, yeah.
Because Justice Hall jumped on this almost straight away, and really did quiz Mr. Powell for quite a while about how you can make that conclusion, and more to the point, why would there be this variance? And what he said was, or his explanation was, the actual fibres in the pants themselves, there was quite a bit of variance in them. When he took control fibres from various parts of the pants and various parts of the swatch, there was a natural or a variance in and of itself. And so that is why there would be a variance with the fibres that were found on the 2 dead victims and the 1 live victim. So yeah, an interesting leap to make, and I'm sure that it will be something that Mr. Jovich might want to make something of as well. But Damien might want to pick me up on that.
I don't think that there's unless you're sitting there going through what you're going through, Tim, it's very difficult to, when I say going through, unless you're, I think, sitting there firsthand and listening to all the evidence, it's very difficult to keep track of the fibres, what the source of the fibre was, what the critical fibre was, and how they play out into the circular, as you put it before. So it's difficult for me in the position I'm in to give sort of, I think, really helpful input into what, how Mr. Jovich might structure a line of questioning to assist the defence in this position.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, Damien, but what I still am finding quite incredible about these fibres collected from a car that was driven by the accused 20 years ago is that they are playing part in a trial today, which is so far down the track. That is still, to me, quite gobsmacking.
It is. And so one of the things that Tim raised just previously that I think sits with what you've just raised there, Nat, is that it seems that the expert has given evidence that effectively says, even though these fibres don't match, they actually do, which is quite a quandary to consider. But I think what I might be able to assist in that, in saying that if you think about, I'm just trying to think, the best example I might give you is that if you think about a pair of jeans, that obviously are made up of a collection of fibres that have all been melded together in some way, shape or form that makes them into jeans. I don't know how they end up in that way, but we understand that they're a material. And then they get washed, and then the tension and the fabric changes because of the amount of times they've been washed. So what I was taking from what Tim had said was that we've got two pieces of fibre that the expert is suggesting are a match, even though on the photo and the test they're not a match. So there's been so many things that have happened to these two fibres that are different since they've been separated that they could ultimately not match today, but they do have all the properties that would have made them be able to match back in the day, if I could put it that way. Is that right, Tim?
Yeah, there is something to that as well, Damien. So even under the microscope, some of the fibres have looked on the surface to be different colours. But what Mr. Powell has said, well, those fibres have been in that car for more, 20 years. They get dirty. They obviously get dirty down to that actual sort of microscopic level. There are obviously, they've been subject to washing and other elements, and so they do undergo certain changes, which will mean that every fibre is not. Could never appear absolutely identical, and so I guess this is why we have gone through this process, and it has been an endurance event. This portion of the trial, because these fibres are so important to the prosecution, and they want to make sure that the Justice Hall has every single variant before him, every single comparison before him. So when they come to sum it up tomorrow, in one respect, and then when the actual UK expert gives evidence next week, they will be able to show him a holistic view of the fibres and point to where we've shown you, Your Honour, that they do actually match stride for stride, dollar for dollar. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Powell has now presented 94 out of those 98 critical fibres, so we're almost there. Tim, who was in court today? Has there been any other people turning up for the fibre evidence this week?
Well, Ciara's father, Dennis, actually did return to court for a couple of hours yesterday, which was a little bit of a surprise, as he hasn't been coming for several months, actually, mostly because of the coronavirus issues. Obviously, Dennis is in his 70s, and with all the concerns around the more elderly members of the public, I think he my understanding is he wanted to come, but he felt it would probably be better and safer if he didn't. But he was there yesterday for the morning session, which was nice to see. But no, we were back to our skeleton staff today, Nat. Just a few hardcore journos.
Yep.
The coppers that have been attending the trial every day. And obviously the main players up the front and obviously in the dock.
And you had some clarification today as to when the state's fibre expert, Dr. Ray Palmer, who's based in the UK, when he will be giving evidence.
Yeah, so we did have a little bit of a mud map of where we're going for the next little while. So Mr. Powell will return for we think it's his 9th day on the stand tomorrow, where he will finally, we think, or we know, we're pretty sure that he will finish his evidence in chief, and his cross-examination may well start. And then we've got the Anzac Day holiday, so we won't resume court until Tuesday, and it's then that we think we will get to Dr. Palmer. He's a world-renowned fibre expert. My understanding was he was actually due to fly out before the COVID-19 dramas. He can't now actually get in unless he wanted to fly, and we wait 2 weeks for him to come out of a hotel room, and I don't think anyone wants to do that. So it'll be the old video link, back on the video link, which will mean late starts and late finishes for us in court next week because of the time difference. So he will be starting his evidence around about 4 p.m. Western Australian time, go probably till about 8 o'clock at night, with a break in between, and that will go for most of next week. So yeah, we will be back on UK time next week, which we did earlier in the trial, and just another one of those things we have to do to get it done.
All the days are blurring into one at the moment. Anyway, in this ISO life in which we're living, just a couple of quick questions for you before we leave today. This is from Rose, and Rose is also, by the sounds of it, scratching her head a bit about the fibre evidence. She asks, if they have also found critical fibres from other vehicles, such as a Ford Falcon, a 1995 Toyota Camry, a 1997 Toyota, on the floor mat, couldn't those fibres come from passengers that had been in other cars, got bits stuck on their shoes, etc.? It seems very narrow-minded to think that after many years the carpet on the floor would only have fibres of one car, wouldn't it? Just a thought, as the seat and boot was consistent.
Yeah, so and this once again, this is the reason why we've gone through this in such detail. The fibres that Rose mentioned there, they were the other comparison fibres that were in the ChemCenter database that were used as comparisons for the grey fibres. But Rose is absolutely right, and we do know that there were many more fibres than just the 98 found in the car, just over and above the 98 critical fibres that we're concentrating on. I'm pretty sure we're going to hear a bit more about a lot more of those fibres when we get to the cross-examination, because of 129 groups of fibres that were found or pinpointed by the database, we've just gone through 2, and so I think there'll be a bit more talk about the possible sources of those other fibres, and whether it will cast any shadow over what the prosecution allegations are.
Yeah. Damien, Murray would like to ask you, I fully understand that you can't in any way presume that Mr. Edwards is guilty, but a question that has stuck in my mind is, in a hypothetical situation, if a defendant in a trial admits guilt to their lawyer but wishes to continue to plead not guilty, can the lawyer continue to represent the defendant? If the question was posed in a hypothetical way, I'm hoping Damien can answer that. It intrigues me, especially in light of the late change of plea in the Huntingdale and Karrakatta cases.
It's a very good question, and it won't be the first time that myself or any other defence lawyer has been asked this question. There's a few variables that Murray's put in there as well that make the question a little bit more difficult than it might seem on the face of it. So in a hypothetical situation, and that's the only situation we can work in, because we can never get inside of what is going on between a lawyer and their client because of privilege. But if you would say, if the question was, if a person who was accused of something during the course of a trial, which is the way Murray has canvassed that question, in a trial admits guilt to the lawyer but wishes to continue to plead not guilty, can the lawyer continue to represent the defendant? What I think the key thing about that would be is during the trial, if if a person was accused of something and the trial had commenced, changed their instructions to the lawyer, which comprised the accused person saying, look, I'm guilty of this, but I want the trial to continue and I want to maintain my plea of not guilty. My answer to that on a general basis would be that I would suspect that their instructions that they were guilty would be inconsistent with their previous instructions that they were not guilty. So on that basis, I would, given the information that I've got about the question, I would say that the lawyer would be conflicted and it would be very difficult for them to continue to represent the accused person. But I think that I should clarify that, Murray, by saying that there are some circumstances in where issues within the trial have had instructions, i.e., I wasn't driving the car. So let's say I was driving the car with your instructions before the trial started. But that wasn't the only thing that would have made the person guilty. Then during the course of the trial, that person might turn around to the lawyer and say, you know what, I was guilty. I am the person that drove the car. It might not amount to guilt in the full picture of the trial. So even though the lawyer now becomes aware that the person was driving the car, it may not completely resolve the issue of the person's guilt. So the point that I'm making about that, there are circumstances where a lawyer can continue to represent a person when they change some element of their instructions during the course of a trial, but you're left in a position where they can still, the police, like the client could say, the police are still required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And if the only thing you're testing is whether the police can test that, it might be the case that the lawyer could continue to represent them. But generally speaking, if we're looking at the trial that's in front of us in relation to this podcast, I would have said that would create a situation where this legal team would be conflicted 100%, because it would, if this person turned around and said that they were guilty, in a general sense, then there wouldn't be a way that I could see. And remember that I'm not the lawyer acting for them, so I don't know what the instructions are. I've got no idea what the instructions are. But the way that Murray set this question up, I would imagine that it would be very difficult for this legal team to continue to represent the defendant in those circumstances. So I don't think that that's got anything to do with the Huntingdale and the Karrakatta cases, unless Tim can see something that I'm missing in the context of the Huntingdale and Karrakatta cases. I don't think that really plays a part in the question in relation to his plea in this trial. That helps, Murray.
Yeah. I mean, that's right, Damien. Because look, it would have been a completely different issue if we had started the trial on the basis that Mr. Edwards maintained his not guilty pleas to those two and then changed his plea mid-trial. That might cast a lot more issues than it did, even though it did create some issues, but some of them were actually positive in terms of the time that the trial was going to take, because those cases, the Huntingdale and the Karrakatta cases, as they were going to be run, didn't have to be run that way. We've heard evidence, but nowhere near as much as we did. It's a question we get asked as court reporters as well, quite regularly. Do lawyers, just take the money even though they know their clients are guilty? The way that Damien's phrased the answer is the answer that most other lawyers that I've asked the question of have said it as well. If you get an instruction that completely conflicts, it's your duty to the court to tell the truth, basically.
And I think listeners who have been emailing us have been quite interested in this idea of the change of plea with the Karrakatta and the Huntingdale attacks. And I'm not sure, Tim, but in the 6-hour video statement that was filmed, the police questioning, would those charges have been put to Bradley Edwards at the time, and we would have seen, a plea of sorts in that?
Absolutely, they were, Nat, and this was raised in the opening, and it will be raised in the closing as well by Miss Barbara Gallo, because in those interviews, as we understand them, we haven't seen them yet, but in those interviews, as we understand them, Mr. Edwards denied those offences at that time in 2016. Obviously, he's since changed his plea, and Ms. Barbara Gallo raised that issue in her opening in terms of Mr. Edwards being willing to tell the police untruths at that time about those offences, and so how can you believe anything? Then the correlation to will be, how can you believe anything he says about the other offences that he's charged with? But and it's not so long now until we actually do get to hear those questions and answers when the video is played. So that will be extremely interesting.
Yeah, that is the video that everybody is waiting for. Thank you both so very much for your time, and thanks for your company today. We hope you can join us tomorrow for day 78 of Claremont in Conversation.
This podcast is hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au. And if local news delivered differently appeals to you, tune into WA's newest morning show, The West Live with Jenna Clark. It's talkback radio, but without the interruptions. Listen live weekdays from 8:45 a.m. on thewest.com.au or catch up with the podcast.